Today we're mixing an entire electronic track from scratch using Xvox. Take a listen to the before and after.
Then I'll do it all over, do it all over, do it all over. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. And baby, you keep letting me in, it's no good.
This is one of the biggest transformations we've seen on this channel. We're going to be breaking it down step by step and showing you exactly how we got these results. As always, I've taken care of all my track organization and color coding. I've got markers set up so I can quickly jump around the session, and I've taken care of any tuning and editing so I can just focus on the creative aspect of the mix. So with a track like this, there's a lot of work to be done, both with the track and the vocals. Sometimes when there's a lot of work to be done on leveling, I like to section it out by instrument. So I'll start with just soloing the drums. Right now the kick is very light compared to the snare. The snare is heavy, the kick feels like it's not really that impactful. So probably need to turn that up and maybe turn the snares down. Then the next thing I'll listen for is the hi-hat, cymbals, top loops, things like that. Right now they're very loud. And whenever the hi-hats and top loops and cymbals are too loud, it kind of makes all your drums feel weak because those elements don't really provide any impact. It kind of draws your ear away from the kick and snare and other instruments that do. So we're going to tuck those in. Let's see if we can blend the bass in with that. Let's throw in the rest of the instruments. I'm just going to mute the vocals for now. So I'm looking for the elements in the mix that are going to bring the most excitement and punch to this track. And the synth stack is definitely one of them. You'll notice when we take it out, it just completely loses all of the impact. Obviously, this vocal chop is also really important. It's playing a melodic role. This vocoder is pretty cool as well. So this verse synth, when it's too low in the mix, it sounds kind of weak. That's because this element is really driving the rhythm forward during the verse. So we want to make sure we give it a good amount of level, make sure it feels right. All right, let's play with some vocals in here.
Even though I know how it ends, I still come over.
So we have some pitched vocals here. I think these are just meant to be kind of supplementing the lead, so I'm just going to tuck those in nicely.
Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. All over. Do it all over again. Do it all over.
So at this point, I'm liking where the balance is sitting with all the elements very roughly. I'm not fine tuning yet. I just want to get it a lot closer because it would be really hard to start processing individual elements if you didn't have kind of a general idea of everything that's in the mix. So that's why I always like to start with just leveling things out. One thing I'm noticing is that we're clipping the mix bus. I'm just going to turn all the faders down so that we have enough headroom here.
All over.
We've got a good amount of headroom and I like where the mix is sitting. Now let's start processing some vocals. I'm going to start with the verse vocals and put Xvox on it. Let's just get a basic chain set up.
Another story you tell to your friends. You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you.
So right off the bat, we're getting a ton of clarity and smoothness out of this compression. It's bringing it right to the front of the mix. I'm going to play around with some different dynamics modes. There might be some interesting options there. I just want to hear what they sound like.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you. Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you.
So VCA and FET is really interesting on this track. It's definitely a punchier compression. It adds some excitement to the vocals. I definitely like how it sounds on this particular track. So I'm gonna go with that one.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend.
Let's shape the tone. Now for a track like this, electronic, kind of pop, we want it to be super bright, super exciting, probably pretty airy. So I'm gonna stick with this modern mode for now and just try shaping the highs and mids. Might cut out the lows if there's a little muddiness, and then play around with the air slider.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you. Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend.
I'm really liking how that sounds. I'll play around with the different tone modes just to see if I like a different one better.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you.
Modern just feels really open on this particular track, so I'm gonna stick with that one.
Am I the story you tell to your friends?
On a track like this, I like to do my de-essing after I've already set my tone because I know I'm going to be pumping a lot of air and high end into it. That way I can gauge how it's going to actually sound.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you.
I like how that sounds, very smooth and natural. Now the rest of the track in this section is kind of ethereal. It's got this spacey sound to it. So I kind of want to put the vocals in a similar space. I'm going to play around with infiniverb and plate and see if either of those gives me that feeling.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you. Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend.
Plate just sounds really nice, kind of bright. Infiniverb is a little darker, a little bit longer. I'm kind of torn between them. I'm gonna play with the delay and see if that pulls me in one of the directions.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you. Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you.
I think plate, the delay, and reverb combination just goes together so well for this track. I'm going to start playing around with that. Now I'll just dial in the right amount.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you.
That's feeling really nice. Let's hear before and after Xvox so far.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend.
Definitely brings it forward, sounds nice and lush. Let's move on to the effects. I'm thinking it might be interesting to play around with spreading this out a bit with the pitch widener, but I also might want to play with the chorus just for a more subtle thickening.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you.
Yeah, chorus in this case works really well for me. I like how it just subtly fills out the vocal. It doesn't sound over-modulated. It's just a nice thickening sound.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off or you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you.
Let's copy this over to the post hook here.
We do it all over, all over.
I like playing around with a quarter note delay in this section. It just kind of fills these spaces. It gives it a cool effect.
We do it all over.
So now I'm going to play around with some of these lead accent effects here. So we've got one here. We've got a couple like delay things happening here, very specifically placed filler vocals. Let's start with just this one. It's kind of a double. And I think it'd be interesting to just play around with a ton of reverb, really wash this out. Maybe even some phaser.
back to you. I know.
And maybe delay.
Back to you. I know it'll never be like back to you.
Let's see if that's adding anything to the mix for us.
Back to you. I know.
Yeah, it just gives it a little bit of a different shine on that part, which I like. Let's move on to these sections in the hook here.
Even though I know.
So I think it'd be cool if this was kind of split up left and right a bit, and maybe had kind of a telephone effect on it. So it felt like kind of a ping pong telephone delay. I'm gonna copy over the Xvox settings, flip over to telephone.
Even though I know.
That's pretty cool. Let's try that on the other side.
Even though I know how it ends, I still.
Very nice. Let's play around with this low octave and high octave. And really, I just want to squash and saturate these. Let's use the amp as effects mode.
And I'll do it.
Just makes it a bit more interesting sounding. Let's put that on the high one as well. So these tracks are meant to be a little bit more felt than heard. They're not something that you would necessarily want people to gravitate towards as they're listening, but it does just add a nice size and unique timbre for this section of the mix.
And I'll do it all over.
So we've got some harmonies here, some background vocals. Let's pan these out.
We do it all over again.
So with these tracks, I'm going to group them together and process them with Xvox as a group.
We do it all over.
And I like this kind of airy background vocal part, so I'm going to boost the air a good amount.
We do it all over. We do it all over again.
So you can hear how that really brings them out in the mix, especially in this post hook. Listen before and after Xvox here.
We do it all over. We do it all over.
Finally, we've got these ad libs here towards the end. Put Xvox on there.
We do it all over. Oh, we do it all over again. We do it all over again. We do it all over again.
So I think it's too spacey. It's a little bit too much reverb there. I'm going to pull that back just to make sure it feels like it's with the rest of the vocals a little bit more.
Keep letting it again. We do it all over again. We do it all over again.
Now I want to do a trick where I'm going to process all these vocals in a single bus. I'm going to call this my vocal bus, and I'll pull Xvox up on here and just boost the air plus, because with a track like this we want a ton of pop shine. We're not necessarily going for a super natural sounding vocal. We want this thing to feel super slick, super polished. So we're going to process it all as a group now.
It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we do it all over. We do it all over again. It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we do it all over. We do it all over.
A little bit of compression is nice too, especially with this opto and fet. It's super natural and transparent.
It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we do it all over. It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we.
When you do this trick, you want to be really careful with the air plus slider. It's easy to just push it up and kind of forget about it, and all of a sudden your ears acclimate to this super bright vocal. So it's important to kind of get that one right within the first few times you're listening to it. Otherwise, your ears will kind of trick you and you'll think, oh, it's not that bright, when actually it's really, really bright. Next part of my process is I'm going to add a limiter on the master track here, the stereo output, just to add a little bit of glue so I can kind of mix into the limiter a little bit. I'm not going to try to slam it, but I just want to get a sense of what it's going to feel like when it's glued together in that final stage. So now I want to figure out what I want to do with the track. Right now, it's not quite as exciting as I want it to feel. It just kind of feels a little sterile right now. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to process everything except for the kick in a single group. And what I want to play with is a little multiband compression on all of the instruments, just to squeeze them together, make them a little more exciting sounding. But I'm leaving the kick out because I don't want to squash the kick. I want to make sure that kick stays really punchy throughout. So I'll process that separately. So one trick I'll often try if I want to make something more exciting is I will process the high mids and highs, and I'll compress those a good amount, and then I will push up the makeup gain, so it's going to effectively make those ranges more compressed but also more forward in the mix. It's going to make it feel a little more exciting. So you can hear when we take it away, it feels dull and not very together. When we put it back in, all of a sudden it's super exciting. And part of that is it sounds brighter. Now another way you could go is if you pulled up an EQ. You could try boosting the highs that way. The reason I like the multiband compressor in this instance is it's controlling the dynamics of those high frequencies. So the hi-hats and the snares don't ever sound too harsh. They don't poke out too much. It's just kind of controlling those while also bringing up the overall high frequencies. The other thing I want to try is just a little bit more saturation. I'm going to pull up this simple overdrive here. So it's adding just a little bit of grit to the rest of this track, which in this case is helping get away from that too clean, too sterile sound. It's giving it a little bit more vibe. Now I might start playing around with some more individual elements. One thing I'm noticing is the snares feel a little bit light. Specifically this big snare, I feel like it's supposed to be a bit more powerful in the low mids. It's got really nice crack to it, but it doesn't have a lot of body. So I'm gonna pull up an EQ on that and see if I can boost some of these body frequencies. See how much more body it has now? It feels way more balanced. Before, it felt kind of like it was coming through a small speaker. Now it feels like it's coming through the big arena speakers. So now let's play around with this kick. I want this kick to feel a lot bigger, a lot more powerful. I'm gonna start with just EQing and rolling off really, really lows, like below 20. And I can actually see the fundamental of this kick is actually somewhere around like 50, 60. So I might actually roll off up to there about. And the reason for that is the more we can get rid of that we really don't need, which would, in this case, be lower than the fundamental of the kick, the louder we're going to be able to get the overall mix without unwanted pumping and distortion from the limiter. So with this kind of mix, in this case, I'm gonna just roll off, you know, roughly up to 30. We definitely don't wanna get anywhere near this fundamental of the kick. Otherwise, we're gonna start getting really weak sounding kicks. But, you know, right around here is gonna be pretty safe. Now I'm gonna boost some of the low mids, and I'm actually gonna probably bring the level up a little bit too. So just the moves we made to the kick, instrument bus, and snare before and after. It's a lot more lively, it's got a lot more color and vibe to it, and it's not so sterile sounding. And this track really needed that. It was feeling a bit sterile, so I start processing these things in groups, doing some distortion, doing some multi-band compression to just excite it and make it a little bit more lively, and it's really worked so far in this track. Now it makes me want to go back into our vocal bus and maybe excite this a little bit more as well, maybe boosting some of the mids. So one thing I've been doing so far with this mix is mixing very quietly. And I usually do mix relatively quietly during these stages, but I'm doing it especially on this track. And one of the reasons is I want this track to feel like it slams, like it hits really hard. The best way to do that is to mix super quietly to try to achieve that excitement and that slam effect while the monitors are quiet. Because if you do that, then when you turn it up, it's really gonna slam. So I'm actually turning them down a little bit more right before I set my mix bus, just to see if I can get even more excitement out of this. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. So I'll start with a little bit of EQ, and I just want to roll off the super lows. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. And baby, you keep letting me in. It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we do it all over. I'm boosting the mids and the high mids here a little bit, very broadly, just to lift the presence. Over. Even though I know how it ends, next I want to add just a little saturation to the whole thing here as well. Just a very minor amount of it glues it together really nicely. Next I'm going to play with the limiter and just boost this a bit more to get some more level. So now after I've got my mix bus kind of set up here, I'm going through different sections of the track, and chances are things are going to feel a little bit empty. Right now in the hook, it feels a little empty, and that's because I've been setting everything mostly for this post hook where all the instruments are. So now I need to go back through and see what needs to happen in these other sections. So for example, in the hook, we may need to clip gain up some of these elements in the mix. I know how it ends, I still come on. And baby, you keep letting me in. It's no. So the hook guitar actually I think could probably be a bit louder, so let's just clip gain that up. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. And baby, you keep letting me in. Possibly the same with the bass here as well. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. I want to be very careful when you're setting the level of the bass when you're mixing super quietly like this. Generally, I like to check that pretty closely when I turn my monitors back up, just to make sure that I didn't overdo it. It's very easy to overdo the bass when you're mixing at very low levels. Baby,
you keep letting me in. It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we do it all over.
So this tom fill, I want this to feel really exciting, really pumped up. So I'm gonna turn those toms up, and I might actually tuck the snare build back just a little bit so there's some more contrast there between the snare build and the toms.
Over, all over again. Over, all over again. We do it all.
The SFX are a great way to increase the energy. Again, this is something I may want to be careful with doing when my monitors are so low. I mean, they are barely above a whisper right now. Sometimes you can overdo it, especially with these types of elements. So I'm just going to be careful of it.
Over, all over again. We do it all over.
All right, so now for the fun part, let's turn it back up and see how it sounds.
All over. We do it all over again. We do it all over.
All right, so I'm really happy with how it sounds. Actually, surprisingly, the thing that I'm not very happy with is the bass in the post hook. It just feels like the only low end I'm getting is really from the kick. And so I want this bass to be a lot bigger. So I'm gonna duplicate the track, pull just the post hook sections down, because I liked how it felt in the hook, and I'm gonna process these a little differently. I'll start by just turning it up a bit. I'm not getting a lot of sub information from this bass track. So it's important to note that you have to be extremely careful whenever you're touching the low end like this. I almost never do this. I know this room very well. I feel like the subs just aren't carrying the lows in this section, and that's why I'm doing it. I would only be touching these low frequencies like this if I really thought that it needed it.
Do it all over, all over.
And that, for me, does the trick in this instance. It's not something I would do every time, and only in the case where it's like, yeah, this needs to really be massive in the subs, and I just don't hear it at all. By just turning up the level of it, it helped a little bit, but I was still not getting those like really subby frequencies to cut through. So that's when I turned to EQ on that. So now I'm going to start thinking like, how can I make this mix even cooler sounding? Like, what can I do to just take it to the next level? One of the things that sticks out to me, and it's been kind of bothering me throughout, is the snare. It just doesn't have that size that I feel like it probably should. So I'm going to play around with this big snare. The sample has that kind of gated reverb sound to it. I want to see what happens if I just throw some massive reverb on this. So it definitely places that snare nicely in the mix. Let's listen to the verse.
Am I the story you tell to your friends?
So like this first SFX hit probably needs to be a lot bigger.
Am I the story?
Let's just pump the gain up here.
Am I the story you tell to your friends?
So just that, I mean, we cranked the gain on this clip. I think it was around 9 before. Take a listen now to this intro.
Am I the story you tell to your friends?
Nothing wrong with it. The vocal does kind of come out of nowhere, but also it's not special. It doesn't get me excited. When I pump this back up to like 27.
Am I the story you tell to your friends?
Now that's a bit overboard, but all of a sudden, I'm excited. I want to hear what's happening next. It's a cool part of the track now. Let's try that again. Let's back it off a little bit.
Am I the story you tell to your friends?
Now this vocal chop in the verse here is doing some cool things. It's also in the intro, but it's getting lost a bit. I think this definitely needs to be pumped up a bit more.
Am I the story you tell to your friends?
All right, so now in this verse 1B section, this 808 has to cut through more. It has to feel massive. Let's just pull this onto its own track. Let's just play with the gain of it first.
I I see you in the background of Snapchats and mutual friends. You're looking good, good to see you again. A timing was off, baby, just tell me when. Just tell me when, and I'll do it all over. Even though
So as I'm going through the mix, I'm just looking for the elements that I want to bring out to the forefront. Just all the little interesting elements, just making sure that when that happens, my ear goes right to it. And this is probably the thing that took me the longest to understand about mixing is it's not all technical. In fact, most of it isn't technical. You can see we're not using a ton of plugins. We've done a little bit of creative routing and, a couple plugins here and there. Obviously, if we weren't using Xvox, we'd have to have, probably 6 or 8 different plugins to accommodate for all these things. But, it's not really about the technical. It's really about, does this sound like a song you want to listen to, and is your taste guiding your mix decisions? For example, turning up the effects here in the beginning to have this big ramp up and explosion to really draw you into the song, that's the kind of stuff you want to be paying attention to. That's way more important than, whether or not you notched out a frequency on a track in the mix. It's more about this big picture. Is the track exciting? Does it continually keep you engaged? That's always going to be a better mix than a technically perfect mix. As I'm going through this last section here, the ad libs, they're just not sitting right for me in the mix. Take a listen.
we do it all over.
I just can't get them to sit right no matter where I set them. And that's usually a sign that they need to be automated because I want certain parts to jump out and then I want them to fall back. If you can't get it perfectly right by just setting the fader, chances are you probably need to look into automating it. So like this part of the line is really cool. I want to make sure that we get that. Again, over here, I think we want to get some of that in there as well. But here on this long note, it kind of gets a little bit in the way, so I'm going to dip it down and bring it back up. And it definitely kind of gets in the way towards the end here. And I want this one to come through a bit more. So I'm going to push those up. So I'm just massaging these levels so that I can hear it, but it never sounds out of place. I like how those are sitting now. I can always hear what I want to hear from them, but they never feel like they're getting in the way or stepping on anything else. So right now I'm loving where this mix is sitting. It feels very solid, and there's nothing that's jumping out at me that needs to be tweaked right now. So it's a great time to give my ears a rest, come back with a fresh perspective, and start to compare it to commercial reference mixes and make any final tweaks before I'm ready to print it. So I've just come back after a quick break. My ears are refreshed, and I was able to hear this with a fresh perspective. I also compared it to some commercial reference mixes that I like in the genre. And my initial reaction to it is the mix is very close, but the mids and especially the upper mids are a little bit harsh. They're just pushing a little bit too hard. And I really want to sweeten it up to make it a little bit more of a pop mix and not too raw sounding. So I'm going to play around with the mix bus and see if I can just kind of shape the high and high mids a little bit better just to sweeten it up. I don't want it to be too harsh. I just want to sweeten up the overall sound.
And I'll do it all over. And I'll do it all over.
You can see that around this 3K mark, and I've got it really wide right now, it's doing a lot. This is really where a lot of that is happening. As I push it up, it's going to sound harsher. If I pull it back, it's going to sound a little sweeter.
And I'll do it all over. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over.
So we got to get this balance right before I had it boosted a bit. I think a little boost might be good. I definitely narrowed it, which is good. Maybe instead, let's boost this one and then just boost a little bit around 15, 16K.
And I'll do it all over. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. And baby, you keep letting me in. It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we do it all over. We do it all over.
So as I boost this, the hi-hats, especially this open hi-hat, is pretty harsh sounding now. So I'm going to go into that track specifically, and I'm just going to pull it back a bit. I notice I'm doing really small moves at this point. I'm not going in and trying to like completely reshape the whole tone structure. I'm just trying to kind of nudge it a little bit more in this direction. And that's why I'm able to do it at this level on the mix bus. If it was like way too harsh, I would want to go in and find out why is it too harsh? What elements in this mix are causing it to sound too harsh, and start to tweak those individually to get them sounding better. At this point, it's just a gentle nudge in the right direction. So I'm able to do it at this level. Now that said, some of the elements do seem a little bit harsh and like they're causing some of this harshness, like this drop vocal chop here. If I just pull out a little bit of these high mids, it might just smooth it out a bit. So I like how that's feeling now. It's a lot sweeter sounding. It doesn't have as much harshness in the high mids. So at this point, I've made all the tweaks that I'm hearing. I've compared it to commercial reference mixes, and it sounds like it would be on the same playlist in terms of just the overall brightness, the bass, the overall loudness. So it's feeling like a solid mix at this point. I'd probably continue combing through it a few times and just making sure I listen to all the elements, make sure it feels right. Obviously listen on different systems, in the car, on the phone, in different rooms. Sometimes you can hear things that stick out in those scenarios as well that you can probably take care of. Let's take one more listen to where we started and where we ended up.
And I do it all over, do it all over, do it all over. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. And baby, you keep letting me in, it's no good.
As you can see, we didn't do a ton of processing on this mix. It didn't take 100 plugins. Now, obviously, if we had done it without Xvox, we would have to probably have 6 or 8 different plugins to replace everything we're doing with Xvox. Really, you can take the concepts and apply it to any processors you're using. Thanks again for joining us for this mix. I hope you've picked up some tips and tricks and points of inspiration that you can take into your next session. Drop a comment below with what style or genre you'd like to see us mix next.
Am I the story you tell to your friends? You laugh it off while you try to pretend that I was nothing but a joke to you. You look me up every now and again, write me a message that you'll never send. You know sometimes I do the same thing too. I see you in the background of Snapchats and mutual friends. You're looking good, good to see you again. A timing was off, baby, just tell me when. Just tell me when, and I'll do it all over. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. And baby, you keep letting me in. It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we do it all over. We do it all over again. We do it all over We do it all over again. We do it all over We do it all over This is not what I want. My friends call me crazy, cause I keep on trying to defend the reasons I stay in this mess that I'm in. I hate how I let you under my skin, but just tell me when and I'll do it all over. Even though I know how it ends, I still come over. And baby, you keep letting me in. It's no good for me, no good for you. We both know what we're getting into, but we do it all over.